Hello everyone, Michael here, vegan space scientist. You might notice a few different things today. First is that hopefully my audio quality is better than it has been in the last few months. That's because I'm back in Sydney now, and I have my proper Blue Yeti microphone back. But I'm not using a camera at the moment. That's because I just have a $5 webcam and thought probably better to just have no camera than to have that. I'll keep this introduction fairly brief. Last week I did a video with Pat Bateman, also known as That Vegan Lawyer, on the links between atheism and veganism. In many ways, atheism and veganism are similar. They're both about rejecting traditions that don't make sense, valuing the truth, and being ethical. We talked about the overlap between the demographics of vegans and atheists, and why they're both fundamentally about valuing what is true and what is ethically right. For my part of the video, I drew pretty heavily on Kim Socha's book, Animal Liberation and Atheism, which I'd highly recommend. Can't recommend it enough, actually, for anyone interested in learning more about the overlap and learning about why all religions, even the ones that we often think are associated with peace, like Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism, are really about fundamentally putting the non-human as other and separate and putting forward an anthropocentric view of the world. So please enjoy. Share any thoughts you have in the comments, and I will see you next time.
So welcome back to another video. Today, me and Michael from Vegan Space Scientists are going to be talking about veganism and atheism, drawing on comparisons and similarities between the two, and ultimately arguing why both are moral and intellectual imperatives. So after a disinterested and non-committed type stint with being agnostic, I never really considered being an atheist seriously. What changed was when I really started to appreciate and understand science and the importance of evidence. Why do we believe the things we believe? What influences a rational person to take the position she or he takes? It dawned on me that as someone who appreciated forming beliefs, arguments, and positions in a serious way, based on evidence, it no longer made sense to be undecided about something as important as a deity. My becoming atheist also came about as a result of me clarifying my own misconceptions about the atheist discourse. For example, I used to question just how logical it was to confidently not believe in God when you couldn't really prove the assertion either way. I finally came to understand that the atheist's non-belief in God is conditional, not absolute, and would change if evidence of a deity should ever surface. Since coming to this realization, I've seen very little evidence of a more rational position to assert. Some recent studies currently show us that the percentage of atheists in the vegan population is increasing, and I have a couple of theories as to why this is. Both ways of thinking require a certain level of objectivity, rationality, and certainly in a lot of cases a far greater level of critical thinking. This is because both religion and animal exploitation have been indoctrinated into humans basically since the time they were born. Without critical thinking, without rational thought, without an authentic moral conscience, it seems unlikely that people will embrace these two systems of thinking, veganism and atheism, in this pro-God, pro-creature eating world. And this is extremely unfortunate because both these systems of thinking have the potential to create the most happiness and most good in the world. An integral aspect of atheism and veganism is that it can be seen as encouraging a kind of humility. While the majority of religions put a strong, arguably sole emphasis on divine reward, which can encourage a rather human-centric, self-interested worldview, veganism deconstructs the anthropocentric nonsense of religion, while atheism reminds us we are but one life organism in a massive cosmic galaxy. Perhaps the most compelling realization which becomes apparent when considering the vegan-atheist nexus is the inclination for this particular enlightened demographic to possess the ability to change when presented with evidence. While many people claim to be reasonable and adaptable, being a vegan and atheist is proof that you are able to reason and adapt in ways which address some of the most important moral and philosophical questions of our time: animal suffering and the question of divine existence. Most vegans, whether intentionally or not, hold value in what it means to say something is true. The very basis for ethical veganism is nearly impossible to refute. Consider the 4 premises, for example. Animals are sentient, animals feel pain, pain is bad, therefore avoiding harming animals is good. Now, if we're being intellectually honest with ourselves, unless you're a complete nihilistic psychopath, those are four premises which are very difficult to refute. It's the same deal with the atheist trajectory in placing value in truth-seeking. Is there evidence for this belief? Is there evidence for a deity? Well, at the moment, there is none. The most truthful conclusion to come to then is a non-belief. I'm not unsure if there is a purple dragon in my room or not. I know there isn't because there's no evidence of it. This is why the atheist agnostic, in my opinion, is the most truthful position to take. Many people still believe that morality can only be derived from religion or religious sources such as the Holy Bible. In reality, nothing could be further from the truth. As per thinkers such as Sam Harris argues, science can answer moral questions, because morality exists in human consciousness, or sentient consciousness. Arguably, this is the only place it really does exist. Things which result in pleasure and the enhancement of well-being is usually always good. Things which result in unnecessary pain and suffering is usually always bad. This simple yet profound premise is captured in ethical veganism, and for the atheist who cares about morality, which, let's face it, is most people, within atheism too. So, hopefully one day words like ethical veganism and atheist agnostic, hopefully these words will just become redundant, and not harming other living beings and not believing in imaginary ones will simply become the norm. Which is another thing that atheism and veganism have in common. It's about moral and social evolution. I'll let Michael, vegan space scientist, take it from here.
Hi everyone, Michael here, vegan space scientist. First, thank you to Pat for coming up with the idea for this video, the topic, and for getting it all set up. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about why and how I became vegan and also atheist. We'll do it in order because I actually became atheist first. I didn't exactly grow up in a religious household. I thought I did at the time. I thought that I was growing up with parents who were Christian. And I went to a Christian school for most of my education from years 2 to 12. And I went to Mass every week, and I took pretty much everything about the Christian Catholic religion as truth. It was only later, actually after I became atheist, that I discovered that my parents weren't really that interested in religion. They were also raised Christian by their parents, but they said that they were really just pocket atheists. Where I got my religion, I guess you could say, was mostly from my education. Now, when I finished school and stopped going to Mass every week, I slowly started to doubt things a little bit more, and I started studying science at university. And bit by bit, it just stopped making sense. The final straw for me was when I spent some time trying to really work out whether religion was true or not. And I approached it as a scientist would. I went and looked at the evidence for and against. I even joined a Christian atheist debating forum online where I listened to people make their arguments for religion being true or not. And yeah, in the end, it just didn't make sense. I did go through a period of depression when I realized this. There was no afterlife, and that really scared me. But it was a big change in my life. So I kind of finalized my becoming atheist in probably 2012, which coincidentally is the same year that I became vegetarian. After I became atheist, probably a few months later, I started to think about maybe I should be vegetarian for environmental reasons. I had a friend who was very concerned about climate change and also animals for their own sake, and so he was vegan. And after spending time with him, I asked lots of questions, and I became eventually convinced that yes, climate change is a big deal. We should be doing something about it, and a big thing I can do about it is to be vegetarian and to not eat meat. So I became vegetarian. Probably just a few months after I became atheist. And I was vegetarian for about 2 years before I finally decided to become vegan for the animals themselves, for ethics. I'm going to talk about some points made by Kim Socha in her book, Animal Liberation and Atheism, which I've just recently read. Kim is both an atheist and a vegan, and she really talks about these two things and the similarities in a way that I find really compelling. So what is the link between atheism and veganism? There are a few things here. So first is they're both about truth and ethics and rejecting things and traditions that don't make sense anymore. Let me read a quote from Kim's book where she's talking about what Greta Christina, an LGBTQIA activist, said at a conference. So she, as in Greta, explained that when one reveals a non-heteronormative sexual identity, there is no implication that heterosexuality is wrong in any way. Thus, heterosexual friends or family members can hear of one's coming out and not feel like their sexuality is under attack, which doesn't exclude other types of negative responses, of course. In contrast, coming out as atheist to a believer tacitly implies that the believer is erroneous in his or her beliefs. The same can surely be said about revealing one's ethical veganism. Such revelations are perceived as assaults on omnivore's ethics. And I just want to say that I think both of these are definitely true. If you are an atheist and you say to a non-atheist, to a theist, that you are not religious and you think religion is wrong, you don't think there are any gods, you're implying that they're wrong and just incorrect or maybe even unethical. If I told a non-vegan that I think it's unethical to eat animal products, it's implying that I think they're unethical. Back to the quote, both atheism and animal liberation philosophies tell people they have been doing things incorrectly, and more importantly, immorally and unethically. Traditions seen as wholesome and healthy, God and meat, are violent and oppressive. So to sum that quote up, the similarity between atheism and veganism is that they are replacing traditions, theism and carnism, that just don't make sense anymore. They're actually violent, oppressive, unethical, and wrong. Another similarity that Kim talks about in her book is that maybe there was a point where we needed religion as part of our evolutionary progression. Or maybe we needed to eat animal products at some point as part of our progression, as part of the development of our civilization. Maybe it's the case that we wouldn't be where we are today without those things. And so I'll read another quote from Kim's book where she talks about this in reference to Noam Chomsky as well and what he's written. "I do not know what the world would be like, better or worse, if humans had not utilized other animals and created gods and religion throughout the course of our history. Perhaps, as Chomsky states, of things outside his book's parameters, they were once necessary for, quote, security or survival or economic development," end quote. As I see it, their possible needful use then results in material and cultural deficit now. It is irrelevant whether we once needed these things. We should be looking at whether we need them today. And the answer is we just don't. And in fact, it's the opposite. They are harmful, oppressive, and things that we just don't need in today's society. So a major similarity that the belief systems that atheism and veganism are replacing is that, to an extent, they both rely on believing things that are not true. Carnism, in a way, often relies on the belief that animals are less than us in morally relevant ways, so that they don't feel pain or pleasure, or that they're not sentient. Granted, someone can still believe that animals feel pain, pleasure, and are sentient and still consume their flesh, but it certainly becomes a harder sell to present as a consistent argument. And the same with theism. It relies on believing things without evidence or with bad evidence. So why does it actually matter to not believe false things or to believe true things? There are some things that you can believe that are false, but they have pretty much no ethical implications. Like if I was to believe that this piece of white paper is actually green, there aren't really any obvious, clear ethical implications of this belief, even though it is clearly wrong. Many false beliefs, however, do have ethical implications. For example, if someone thinks that members of another race or species can't suffer, or that they have some trait that is different to themselves that is just not true, this does have serious ethical implications. It really matters whether there is actually a God called Yahweh who wants you to stone people who work on Sunday. And so if you care about the truth, and if you care about morality, you should really stop and think about whether there is anything you believe that may be false. It matters that you believe true things. If there is even a chance, you owe it to yourself to explore that. Another link between theism and carnism is that they are both anthropocentric and inherently unfriendly towards non-humans. That is to say, they both prioritize humans first, well above anything that they should be prioritized from any reasonable moral argument. There are many great examples of why and how this is the case from Kim's book, which I'd certainly encourage you to read. But for now, I'll just give one example. This quote from Kim's book is referring to the Christian New Testament Bible. Luke 8:26-39 describes Jesus coming upon a man possessed by many demons, known collectively as Legion. Legion asks Jesus not to send them to the abyss, but rather to send them into a large herd of nearby pigs. Jesus obliges, and the demons, now in pig bodies, run into a nearby lake to drown themselves. Jesus Christ, loving Son of God, cared more for the fate of the demons, beings whose sole purpose is to torment humankind and defy the Almighty God, than he did for non-humans harmlessly eating on a hillside. Christ gave in to the demons' request, showing more respect for pure evil than he did for animals. As Bertrand Russell observes in his 1927 essay, Why I Am Not Christian, quote, "It certainly was not very kind to the pigs to put the devils into them and to make them rush down the hill to the sea," that's putting it lightly. "He could have made the devils simply go away, but he chose to send them into the pigs. He could have made the devils simply go away, but he chose to send them into the pigs." End quote. This manifestation of indifference, bordering on detestation towards animals, seems indefensible, but defenders there are. Kim goes on to present a number of examples from different religions and different religious texts where this is the case, where it is just clear that non-humans are fundamentally secondary to humans. As I was reading this, I found myself thinking, what about Buddhism and Jainism, Hinduism, some other religions where peace is a little bit more of a focus? And yes, Kim spoke about those as well. One way that, say, Buddhism is fundamentally human-centric is the idea of reincarnation. I have to admit that I'm less familiar with the teachings of Buddhism than I am Christianity, just due to my religious upbringing, but I'll try to present this as accurately as I can. The idea of reincarnation in Buddhism is that if you do good deeds in your life and get good karma, you will be reincarnated into a higher being, a different animal. And if you do bad deeds over your life, you will be reincarnated in a lesser being. Now, not only does this imply that non-human animals are less than humans, it also implies that animals deserve their fate because they did something bad in a past life and they deserve to be an animal. And this might make someone feel less bad about doing bad things to a non-human. They might think this non-human deserves their fate because they did something bad in a past life to become a non-human. And it doesn't matter because when they're reincarnated next, if they've done good things in their non-human life, whatever that means, then they will be elevated and maybe they'll be a human again. In fact, Kim talks about a large number of different religions, and her final conclusion is the only one that is close to being neutral for non-humans is Wicca or Wiccaism. Atheism is the only way that we can really fully get away from this anthropocentric view. Unfortunately, religion still permeates in atheists because of its prevalence in society today. The same could be true for me to an extent. If someone tells me that this piece of white paper is actually green, I'm quite happy to tell them, no, it's not, you're wrong. But if someone tells me that they believe Yahweh is giving them directions on how they should live their life, I still feel a little bit uncomfortable in telling them they're wrong. And that's partly because I was raised in a society that thinks that is normal. And so even if atheists no longer believe these beliefs, they still affect them and how atheists live their lives. Atheists often still see animals as less than, partly because this idea is so ingrained in society from religion. We need to shake off the influence of religion completely. Thank you.